Welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of Touched by a Horse. I'm your co-host, Chris Angel. I'm here with today's host, Lauren Mond. Lauren, hello again. Good to see you.
Hello again, Chris. Nice to see you too.
My Seattle friend. We're, just miles apart. Just miles apart. Would you say Seattle?
So far.
You're actually in Redmond? Are you actually in Redmond?
I'm currently in Redmond, yeah.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, it's so good. Well, we have a juicy topic. I mean, before we hit record, we were getting into some really profound and juicy things, which I'm excited to unpack with you. So let's talk about inclusion. We're talking about inclusion, but where does this whole story start? And why is this on your mind?
On my mind for a couple of reasons. One, because I'm working with another author right now and helping him out with some research for his next book. And so it's part of my day-to-day awareness right now. It's also it comes up a lot with people I'm meeting, with movements I'm a part of, and also very personal work as well. Just the who am I kind of work that we all do on an ongoing basis.
Yeah. Maybe even we can start out in the outer circles of inclusion or the public and the conversation of inclusion with the public. And then, because I do think then we can boil it down in our conversation to individually, there are these things about where do I fit, right, et cetera. But let's start out here in the bigger conversation. What are you seeing there right now about inclusion?
So for me, I think, I'm seeing diversity as a kind of a corporate concept. I'm seeing it lose its shine a little bit, and the notion of inclusion coming in. So part of it is an awareness, a growing awareness in the corporate world around being mindful, being human, having emotional intelligence, and realizing that we can't just focus on representation, that we actually have to focus on inclusion and bringing people into the conversation, bringing them into the everyday of how we do our businesses. And so, and honestly, when you look at a lot of the diversity initiatives, they haven't really moved the dial much in the last, 20 odd years. It's, you're still seeing women underrepresented. You're still seeing people of color underrepresented. So we've been focusing on representation without necessarily making any shifts. And I think culturally, for organizations to start thinking a little bit more broadly and thinking about inclusion as a concept, how do we make it a safe place for people to be who they actually are? I saw somebody on Instagram, HR Uprise is actually somebody that I follow on Instagram, great feed. And they posted a quote from somebody who said, "It's all well and good to bring your whole self to work, but me bringing my whole self to work can get me fired." And to realize that, is the reality for so many people still, and almost increasingly sometimes. So how do we help move that dial, right? Because if we're starting to see that if we drive inclusion, the diversity can then naturally flourish.
So I'm hearing a distinction already, and I don't think I've thought of it this way, but diversity, to your point, is about representation. I really like that, right? Like somebody is represented that is different than me, and that's different than inclusion. What I'm starting to hear you say or allude to in inclusion is that there is this diversity, you just have to show up and be different than me and mission accomplished. But in inclusion, there's actually maybe an opening for communication, or I see you, you see me, and it's all okay. Is that?
Yes. And an acceptance, right? And I think something that I've become really, really aware of lately is how much more it sits with those of us who hold privilege, right? To the responsibility, the accountability to shift these conversations and to drive inclusion and to invite in people who are different from us, right? Whether that may be a different culture, a different color, a different gender, a different whatever, different ideology. But the important thing is, people, underrepresented people, are having to fight for their voice, which is ridiculous. We are the ones who should be stepping up and saying, hey, I'm sorry I haven't given you a voice. You know, let's encourage that now.
Yeah.
So for me, it's really kind of looking at all of these movements, right? The Me Too, the Black Lives Matter, all of these movements, Time's Up, and really saying this is a two-way conversation. On one hand, you've got people fighting for rights and fighting for their voices, you know, fighting for the rights of themselves and others, because I include non-human animals in this whole conversation too.
Yeah, sure.
But then it behooves those of us in the dominant culture, the dominant ideology, to step forward and meet halfway. And I don't think we've been doing that. I don't think we've been doing that enough, even when we have. And so bringing in that like, what is inclusion, right? How do we all belong? How do we all learn to accept and to value each other?
So for the sake of not controversy, but for the sake of what might be on the minds of people, I like, in concept, I'm like, that's great. Like, that's amazing. And then in the background, some part of me goes, that's inconvenient. And I have something else I need to work on right now, right? I have a goal. I got a place I'm trying to get to. I don't have time to stop and be like, hey, do you want to join the conversation? If you want to join it, just join it. Like, there's this stuff. And I think this happens. I don't think this is, I'm being very transparent and open for the sake of the conversation, right? That in a work setting, because I know you do a lot of work with businesses, yes?
Yeah.
I think that similarly, businesses can be like, look, we got to go somewhere. So this conversation of inclusion can feel like a distraction to where it is we're trying to build momentum to. And so I want you to speak to that. I want you to speak into how does inclusion actually help me get to where we're trying to go?
It accelerates it. It accelerates it. The research shows that companies that high trust companies, right? So, and you have to have trust to build inclusion, in my opinion.
Yeah. High
trust companies outperform their peers by double digits consistently, right? Companies that have, and I'm going to use the diverse word, right? Companies that have more diverse leadership, right? Outperform at least double digits. Companies that include differently abled people, particularly, outperform their peers by triple digits.
Yeah.
So this is not just, look, innovation is never convenient, right? Innovation is never convenient.
Yes, touche. Well done. Yes, well said. Yes.
So we've got to think about that, right? I mean, when Henry Ford invented he didn't, I don't know if he invented it, but when he was responsible for the adoption of the motor vehicle, right? That disruption, that was highly inconvenient for a lot of people. Right. But it changed the world.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. When we start to step up and say convenience matters less than progress.
Right.
Hey, going to the gym is inconvenient. Getting healthy is inconvenient. Making good choices food-wise is inconvenient sometimes, and it behooves us.
I think too, and push back if you want to on this. I feel like in the space of inclusion, when others feel safe to be heard and bring their best self, there's a lot of people, let's say, what's true right now is there's a lot of people showing up to work and they're not being their best self. They're trying to fit in a box because that box is culturally acceptable. They're like, this is what doesn't get me fired. But this is how I'll behave. But if they're really going to bring who they fully were, that new ideas would actually, like, new things would be born, new things would be created, right? That's
exactly innovation. Yeah, that's innovation. I mean, how many conveniences in our day-to-day lives were created for a small population? I mean, just even if you take into account a professional population like astronauts, right? Well, we have Velcro, we have, all sorts of incredible innovations that were designed for a very small population and then found off-label use.
Right.
So I think this goes to process, it goes to products. When we start to look at how can we design our businesses more inclusively? How can we design our products more inclusively? It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to say, how do we try and boil the ocean, right? We can niche down, we can focus. And there is always unexpected benefit. So yeah, I think that's a big deal for me too, is just to think about that, and to think about, you don't know. I mean, that's the whole point of innovation, right? Is you don't know what's possible until it happens. And then you realize that, well, and then that extrapolates on itself.
I would even say that any sort of innovation, breakthrough, world-changing ideas, world-changing companies, like to some level, there has to be, all of that is self-expression. Like somebody somewhere had an idea and felt free to pursue the idea. That was a self-expression for them. And if we as companies or even cultures, societies can embrace or encourage self-expression, that we're opening ourselves up for innovation faster than 100%. If we try to squeeze it or keep a lid on it all.
Exactly. And we have to realize that we have to create that safety for people to be who they are, right? And to bring the different pieces of themselves into that conversation.
Okay, this is great. This is great. I want to transition to the individual for a second, because I feel like in order for, let's say I'm a CEO of a company and I'm hearing this and I'm like, yes, I really want, the conclusion makes a lot of sense. But in order for me to create a safe environment, I actually have to feel safe. I have to know what safety feels like. I have to know what that experience is. And I think that's a human condition. That's not a diversity experience. That's a human experience of feeling safe and knowing myself, etc. Do you do more of that kind of work than I do? Is that true, or?
I believe so. I do. I think even if we're in a position of great privilege where we're not feeling threatened, right? I think any change in and of itself is, why do you think change initiatives are hard, right? Because they activate a primal fear. They activate that fear of change, that fear of I mean, anything. If I am the most privileged person in the world, right, with the power and the everything else that comes with it, I still have something that I'm afraid of. Right.
Absolutely.
If somebody challenges that privilege, I'm then afraid of irrelevance. I'm afraid of losing my power or whatever. Right. So I need to get comfortable with that. I need to get comfortable with being challenged and being afraid and having that existential moment of, I don't know who I'm going to be at the end of this. I don't know who I am going to become. I don't know what I'm going to lose, right? Because we always focus on what we're going to lose rather than what we're going to gain, right? So part of my job is to help people remember that, that there's so much to gain here, and change is not always loss, and loss is not always loss. Loss can be growth.
Totally.
Yeah. So I think I have to understand what it feels like to embrace that fear, to accept it, and then to find a place of safety from which I can move forward, right? So then that in turn, hopefully, will give me some empathy for somebody else who may be feeling unsafe in a different way, right? Because maybe they are currently not safe. I'm looking at potentially sacrificing some of my comfort, which makes me feel unsafe, or doesn't make me feel, but can cause me to think that I'm going to be unsafe, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there's some empathy that can be derived there.
I think the circumstances are different, but I think the human condition, or the real lizard brain of it all, the primal nature of it all, is the same. It's something's threatening my current safety or reality or how things are. And to change could threaten that. And so that's why I feel like the work that you, Lauren, do with people, I don't think you can, you push back on this too, but I don't know that you can create change with inclusion corporately. I think you have to change it individually, and then it spreads corporately, I think. Because it can't be an initiative. I think if it's an initiative, then I think people on the outside say, yes, this is what we're going to do. But inside, they still have their fear. And if they haven't dealt with that, there's someplace they'll put the brakes on.
Yeah.
If it goes
and they may not even know that they're putting the brakes on, right?
Perfect.
Because
yes, totally.
this is the nature of our biases. This is the nature of some of our fears and our unfinished business, is that it's outside of our awareness.
Yeah, totally.
So yes, totally agree with you. When things like diversity or inclusion become initiatives, frequently, and particularly if they're driven out of, say, HR, they don't tend to bed in. They don't tend to take. Right? Because they're being imposed. They're not, it's like any change, right? If you tell me to do something, maybe I'll do it, but I'm not committed, right? I may do it. Right. But if I decide to change, I'm committed. Right. So I think you're right in that we have to address this on an individual basis. We also have to address it on an individual basis of, this leader's unfinished business, or this leader's, unconscious biases or fears may be different from this leader, right? So each individual person involved has opportunity. Yeah. And I think, ultimately we all want to belong, right? We all want to feel safe and belong, regardless of whether we're in our own tribe or whether we're visiting another tribe. We still want to feel safe, and we still want to feel like we belong.
Absolutely. I love it. Well, so tie this together for me with some of the Gestalt work that you do, because I know, I think if change and innovation is really going to happen, it has to start at an individual level. I think we can have a group, a cultural conversation together about it, but I think the real change happens when we individually start to heal and get clear about what's there for us, which is some of the work that you do through your Gestalt coaching.
Exactly. And I believe that Gestalt lends itself so beautifully to this work, simply because of the fact that, when you're working on through a Gestalt methodology, you're working with the background and the foreground, right? You're working with what is the reality that we're in, the scenario, the situation, the experience. But then we're looking at the background, the stuff that's out of our awareness. And when we look at, the parallel of, maybe I'm dealing with something, any kind of personal growth, there's going to be something out of my awareness. When I'm looking at shifting a cultural conversation around inclusion, there are biases that are out of our awareness, right? So even if I think of something, I don't know, let's just think of something like our affinity bias, right? We feel more comfortable with people like us. That's great, right? But if you say to people, make a list of all of the attributes of the people in your inner circle of safety, right? Of the people that are most like you. And then make a list of attributes of people who are outside of that circle that you may want to bring in. That's actually a more challenging exercise for people than you would think.
Yeah.
Because you're like, what is outside my circle? What?
Right. Yeah. That's great.
And then having somebody say, well, what about, this, maybe this person has a different political view or ideology. And they're like, oh, yeah, I don't want that in my circle. Yeah, but what about that might be valuable in your circle? So,
interesting. Wow.
Yeah, so I think sometimes we don't know what we're not aware of. I'll give you an example. I actually was talking to somebody about this yesterday. When I was a little young recruiting manager, I had somebody join my team that I did not consider as a strong performer. And my manager took me aside one day and he said, Lauren, why don't you trust that guy? And I said, I beg your pardon? Of course I trust him. He's my employee. And my manager said, no, you don't trust him. And it's written all over you.
Wow.
Whenever this poor guy comes into your office, your body language is so eloquent. And it was completely outside of my experience, right? I had no awareness that this was happening. And so when he said that, I had to really think about it. And then I had to be aware in the moment when I'm interacting with this person, wow, what am I showing up as to him, but also what's coming up for me? Why am I showing up as this, as not trusting this person? Like, why does it look like that? And so I had to do some introspection. I had to do some work. and
Yeah.
think about, okay, what that might be, because it wasn't anything about this person at all. It was from memory, something that this person reminded me of.
Yeah.
Right. That was completely unrelated. So of course it's not fair to not trust him, but because it was outside of my awareness, there I was projecting all over this poor guy. And until I became aware of it and I could address it and then go back to that old trigger and decharge it, right? And then re-engage and have a different conversation and a different relationship with my employee. You know, and so thank goodness my manager, you know, was somebody who could have a conversation with me about that.
It's a great point too. The thing about that is that you rarely can see your own biases or your own stories. You so often need someone outside to show it to you, to point it out to you. Kindly, right? Yeah, right. Yeah. Which is so important. I mean, again, to the point of inclusion, and if there really is going to be change, right, for the sake of inclusion, to the benefit of what inclusion provides, then we are going to have to point it out for each other. Yeah. And I think, again, to your point, it's a personal journey to bring that into the world.
Right. And that's also safety, right? I mean, you have to feel safe enough to be able to say to a colleague or even a manager, hey, I don't know if you're aware of this, but here's what I'm noticing.
Yeah, that's good, because I think wounded people, I think we all have our wounds, but people who haven't healed or can't be with their wounds, then when somebody points something out, that feels like you're wounding me. And now I'm digging in my heels again on any sort of change. I don't want to hear that and I think if you go back to race right now, I think there's a huge thing of privilege, white privilege.
Fragility. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to be wounded. And when you say it's my fault, or when you say I'm the bad guy, or all these things, it has how it gets interpreted. And so it feels like a wound. And so I dig my heels in, and then it limits the possibility of inclusion because I haven't dealt with my own.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
wow,
and
so
how do we make it safe? Like, I mean, as a white person, right? How do I personally take accountability to make it safe for myself to receive that information and to be accountable for it, to say, wow, you know, that really, I feel really defensive when I hear that. I feel really defensive and I need to listen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I need to learn to provide compassion to myself so that I can stay open and not get defensive and not close those conversations down.
Right.
Because I can't possibly make it safe for other people if I don't listen, if I don't participate, and if I don't accept, you know, hey, I may not be the person perpetrating a particular act, but I benefit from the structure and the process and the society and all of that is being built on people of my ilk continuing to perpetrate those acts. So I have to be accountable for that. I have to be part of the change. And I have to heal and create safety for myself so that I can then listen, heal outwards, heal back up the generations. That's the other part of this work, right? The Gestalt work is I'm not just working on me. I'm working epigenetically back up through the line and forward down the line. I am going to be a good ancestor if I can heal, if I can create positive change in the world.
That's so good.
Right? So on an energetic basis, I'm going backwards and forwards on the time continuum, but I'm also going backwards and forwards on the human DNA spectrum, right? Ultimately, as we shift, as we heal, we're creating healing for future generations.
Yeah, it's really good. I heard, it was years ago, I heard Gary Zukav say about real power comes from aligning the personality with the soul. Like when there's alignment between the personality and the soul, is where you get to have real power. And I think sometimes what happens in corporate cultures or just in humanity is that there is our soul and then there's our ego. And when our personality or our ego is the thing that is wounded. The soul isn't wounded. The soul doesn't get wounded by something you say to me. The soul can just be in love about it all, but the ego or the personality, I think, can get offended, wounded, hurt. Yeah. But when you can heal that, and I think this is what's so beautiful for the work that you do, when you can heal that, all of a sudden there's a new possibility that's available for people. Yeah. So, yeah. I'm so glad that this is the work that you do in the world. It's so cool. I mean,
me too.
I know, right? Inclusion has come up. Like, that's on my radar lately as a thing that's happening in the world.
Yeah.
And that, but I hadn't thought of, on the heels of this conversation, I hadn't thought of that real change in that is going to happen when people deal with themselves and find a safe place for themselves. And I love that you get to usher that in through your work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is my soul calling.
I love it. How do people, if people want to work with you, how do they do that? Do they call you? Do they reach out to you on Facebook? Like, how does that happen?
They can email me. They can reach out to me on Facebook. Probably Facebook's easier just because I'm on it every day, and you'll hop on my Facebook page and you'll see kind of conversations that I'm starting, thoughts that I'm having, things like that. And if that resonates with you, then send me a message and I'll reach back out and we can have a conversation.
And you do one-on-one work, but do you also do corporate work or team work with teams?
I do. Yeah. So I do one-on-one work, private clients, and I love working with teams. I love working with small teams, either with my horses or without. I think I have corporate in my DNA. I'm one of those people who I didn't become an entrepreneur because I was disenfranchised with the corporate world. Yeah, I became an entrepreneur so that I could help the corporate world get better.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. It's beautiful. So good. So your Facebook page is what? How do they find you?
It is facebook.com/Shamwari Coach.
Shamwari Coach. That's SHAMWARI.
That is right.
Yes. Look at me, Lauren. Look at me. Shamwari Coach. Okay, got it. So facebook.com/Shamwari Coach, and that's your Facebook page. They can like it. They can also look at your content, message you from there, everything.
Yep. Or they can go to laurenmourne.com. So I'm there too.
And just, I know that before we hit record, you had offered maybe to send people the chat. You were an author in this Touched by a Horse anthology series, the third book in the series, right?
Yeah.
And you wrote a chapter, and if people want that, you can send it out in an ebook, an electronic format.
I can do that. Yes, I can.
So they just message you through Facebook, through your Facebook page.
Yeah. I had somebody just read the chapter recently and email me and say, wow, I always knew horses were special. I didn't realize how special. And she's going to come out for a coaching session.
You just, if those of you listening to this didn't catch the first episode that I did with Lauren, or maybe any of the episodes in this entire podcast, you actually do some of the coaching through horses, right? Like the horses actually partner with you in some of the Gestalt coaching.
My horses are phenomenal Gestalt coaches.
Wow.
Yes.
And that then begs that you guys need to go listen to the rest of the episodes and read the books. Just get into the world of that whole thing. Like horses and Gestalt coaching is incredible. So, well, Lauren, thank you. I love this conversation. This was special, and
thanks, Chris.
I think it's important, it's needed, and it's on the minds of people right now. And this is a very, very practical and real and safe way to move the needle in that conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Take care. Until next time. See ya.
Thanks, Chris.